We've just had a great masterclass on get your values off the wall and into the DNA of the company. So I thought I'd record a quick, shorter version, but you're more than welcome to have the longer version. Just send me a request for it. Just a quick version of what we went through and what were those top tips that we shared. So let's quickly go. There's always a culture. You end up with one, whatever you do. So you can either choose to shape it and influence or take your chances. So this was a quote that really resonated, that you have to consciously design and manage the culture to ensure that you get it to where you want it to be. We then asked about the cracks in the cultures. What do cracks in a culture look like? So that is when employees are not so engaged. So we had an example of an employee who called in sick and the other employee said, "Oh, we can help and cover that, no problem." But cracks in culture would look like employees not showing up and not willing to help. Absenteeism, your rate of sickness is a good indicator of how engaged people are. Your turnover rate, but also, what do the cracks look like? It's when there's friction, when people only want to work in their team in silos and are not engaging outside of that and making good working relationships across the supply chain. 3 steps to a great culture: clarity, activation, measure. So, clarity, getting clarity on what the culture looks like, activating is bringing it alive. And measure is ensuring that you have those culture matrix in place to ensure that the culture is improving and that the behaviors that you want in place are actually showing up. So let's you give some top tips about how to get those values off the wall. Or as someone said today, they were in a folder. They were done at the beginning of the company when the company started and they were put in a folder and haven't been pulled out. So how do you get those values out and bring them to life and really live them? So tip number 1 is get clear on what your culture is. So bring some clarity. So culture can be such a fluffy, arbitrary type word. What is it we're actually talking about? So let's jump. So there's 3 things you need to define. Designing the fundamentals of a culture. They are the why. Why do we exist? What is the purpose of the company? What do we value? What's important to us? And how do we show up? How do we live out that purpose and those values? So they gave some examples to that why. And remember, most employees, they want to be valued, work for a winning team, and work for an inspiring mission. So that purpose is really critical. The values are about what is important to us. And then this how, the behaviors, this is the real gold one, translating the values into behaviors. So here we're looking at Impala, and they talk about, like, one of their values is no passengers. And they translated that into get real clarity about take proactive ownership, be decisive, view shifting priorities is part of a bigger plan, be accountable. And the one I love, and hold others to account with no blame. Really clear about how we want to hold each other to account. So, translating your values into behaviors is about bringing clarity to your culture. How do we know they're real behaviors? Are they teachable and measurable? They're what we don't do, what gets rewarded, what gets punished. And that they have to be applicable to everybody, whether you're in the boiler room or the boardroom. So, across the company, applicable to everyone. And that's really important. Our leadership living those values, because that sets the tone for everyone. Activation, bringing the culture to life. So we have a 10-step process for activating a great culture. Don't worry, I'm not going to blast the 10 steps at you today. We're going to talk about step 3, which is you have to see it, hear it, and feel it. So let's give an example. So Bailey of Bristol is a client, and they went and redefined their values because they felt that they had 5 words that sounded good, but they didn't really represent who they were. So they went back and redefined their values. So came with 4 really gorgeous ones. We passed on with pride. We roll up our sleeves. We look ahead. We are one community. But that's just a definition. How do we bring it alive? So they started, as part of their process of building culture, having town halls to build that communication side. And if you notice up in the back, they have their values up there, but they're also then talking about them during their town hall. So they're seeing it and they're hearing it. And what about the feel it? Feel it is here, they've started also employee awards. So when an employee lives a value, that they get an award for it. And now they're getting 30 or 40 nominations a month for an award of how someone has shown up and lived one of the behaviors or the values. So, really gorgeous. And people are feeling that they are truly appreciated and valued and they're being recognized for their contribution. So, really gorgeous to see it, hear it, feel it. And these are only examples. We had some gorgeous then examples of other ways, putting it in front of the presentation, starting off the weeks, talking about the values. And we also had Smell It from a food company. They had added on one, which I thought was brilliant. Also on the onboarding. So making sure that employees come on board, that they have exposure to values and how they're lived, because that's really an impressionable time with new employees. So really consider, can you see it, hear it, and feel it in your company? One really valuable point that was made also is we talked about when you're offboarding someone, can you live your values and make sure that they are also feeling it as they're offboarding and leaving in a really nice way? Remember, they're going out in the world and talking about your company. So offboarding people in a way aligned with your values is a real gold one as well. So really living that employee life cycle from attracting them and putting it on your website to attract employees, onboarding that we just talked about, retention, and then offboarding. So what is tip number 3? Tip number 3, be prepared to take action. Be prepared to take action. So, what do I mean by that? So, the culture is defined by the lowest tolerated behavior. The culture is defined by the lowest tolerated behavior. So, your bar for your culture is what is actually allowed, accepted, that is the lowest behavior that is accepted in your company. That's setting the bar for your culture. So, for your culture, because if it's allowed for one person, what the company is saying is this is allowed throughout and tolerated. 3 actions. So ensure the managers have the confidence and skill to actually pull people up when they're not behaving according to the culture. So that lowest behavior, have they the confidence and skills to be able to have that difficult conversations? And the more regular they are, the better. Second, peer-to-peer feedback culture. So the best way to keep your culture alive and keep it on track is when peers are giving peers feedback. So you may not be able to start with that immediately. That's like the highest level, but you may start with managers giving employees feedback. And then the next one is where managers are asking for feedback. So creating that environment where they are looking for feedback, showing it's okay to get feedback, bringing feedback in as a gift rather than a punishment. And then the ultimate where you create a culture of peer to peer culture feedback. And that is brilliant, where people then keep each other aligned and it doesn't have to be that hierarchical level down, making sure that you're aligned to the culture. And number 3, be prepared to remove. So be prepared to fire. Really difficult one if a person has a really great skill or valuable to the company, where they're, for example, we had on the call, we had someone, maybe a really great sales guy who was bringing the top results, but was treating people really poorly. Really difficult to make the decision then to remove him because he's bringing such great results, but the impact it's having on everyone else. And sometimes when you remove that high performer, everybody else starts to come up. We also talked about how to get to that stage, that there needs to be, first of all, if the behaviors aren't clearly defined, it's really hard to come to that stage because you're talking about opinions rather than specific behaviors. Defining your behaviors, that first tip we gave, really critical. So now we're all talking about the same thing. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And then second, is there feedback regular going on? This should not be a once a year performance review, but how regular a person can give feedback. Weekly, these need to be short, 5-minute interactions where you're saying you did that really well. 3 to 1, 3 positive for every constructive, so that the journey towards, if this person is not aligned to the culture, that the removal is not a shock or something that is this massive thing you have to do, because it is being talked about regular along the way. So, if this resonated, we would say book in for and join us, and we can have a strategy session and we can talk about how we work. We have a culture accelerator program. It's an academy networking club all rolled into one. We have online courses, you get coaching, we have culture clinics, and you get personal development to be a great culture lead and be that culture agent in your company. So, why don't you jump on for a demo? We'll put the link in as well. And yeah, we'd love to talk to you further. What are you going to do today to nudge your culture along that continuum towards great? Thank you for joining.